right. All boys leave home someday. It said so on TV.
When Pokemon came into my life, the Pokemon journey felt like a fantasy. The idea that all children my age would be allowed and able to go on a completely independent adventure, to travel across the land searching far and wide without a parent or a guide, was so outside of my experience that I could not square it with the real world. And depending on how you look at it, it can seem irresponsible or even cruel to send kids out into the world like that and expect them to survive. As much as I could fantasize about a world where 11-year-olds find their own way, it did not feel grounded in reality. I grew up in the 1990s in one of the biggest cities of Latin America, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, a sprawling metropolis of around 10 million people at the time. On a small scale, the neighborhoods I grew up in were relatively walkable. The slow traffic of residential streets didn't pose much risk, and there were usually small grocery stores, restaurants, bakeries, and newsstands within a block or two. But going to school was always by car. My after-school activities when they were not at school also required driving. And my school friends and extended family like grandparents and cousins lived far away. With Rio's chaotic traffic and limited and unreliable public transit, I did not feel comfortable going more than a few blocks on my own, and I didn't until I was older. With that background, it's no surprise that the Pokemon journey was unimaginable. It was another element of this escapist, magical, nearly utopian fantasy world. Maybe it was similar for you, but I see now that the fantasy isn't that far from reality. All it takes is the right cultural framework. Before we explore what social-cultural factors make the Pokemon journey possible, let's consider whether it even is a good thing. Kids will fantasize about being allowed to do whatever they want, but that doesn't mean we should let them, right?
Anecdotally, in my experience with children who come in with mental health issues, adults who come in with the mental health issues, and then also research-wise, and I think it's touched upon in some of the articles that you read, in our society, we have this decreasing autonomy of children because of, the world becoming less safe with cars and crime and things, and then parents becoming more anxious and more clingy of their kids. But something that I have to work with a lot of parents is a lot of your child's anxiety issues come from the fact that you don't let them do things. I'm Gano Hasanbegovic. I'm an associate mental health counselor in Utah. I have a master's degree in mental health counseling and a specialized certificate in child and family therapy.
Research has repeatedly shown that autonomy is an important element of a child's cognitive development. Susan Kegeres, a child psychotherapist and professor at the University of Essex, described it like this.
A child on his own has to be making choices all the time, encountering aspects of himself he could avoid if always escorted. He has the chance to take risks, to test boundaries of behavior, to do mildly dangerous things, and to learn what he can and cannot manage. Opportunities present themselves for imaginative play and interesting adventures, and he has many more chances to encounter both himself and the world.
If they don't do that, then they don't get their own sense of self-confidence. And now this comes from Erik Erikson's stages of development, and the relevant stage for 10, 11, and early teens is industry versus inferiority, which is the idea of I can do things, I can contribute to the world, I have skills and I matter, versus I can't. And this idea of being able to try things on your own and succeed and fail and learn how to get over that failure is important for being able to have self-esteem and confidence and an understanding of yourself as someone who can be meaningful in society.
If we don't have a chance to do things independently, we don't get to discover who we are. The Pokemon journey is a journey of personal growth, of independence, responsibility, confidence, but also of mutual understanding, collaboration, and community.
Wait, I've heard this before.
Yeah, I'm quoting myself there. Then there are also the benefits of the journey itself. the travel.
I think the idea of travel is good for having that sampling of different perspectives and different people that can be really important for the development of your own understanding of the world. Research shows that also it helps with people being more accepting of others. It helps with people, not having xenophobia or racism. It helps with people being able to think in more creative ways.
Exposure to a variety of cultures and perspectives keeps our brains flexible. It keeps us able to learn new skills and adjust to unexpected circumstances. That makes a pretty good argument for why something like the Pokemon journey is valuable and desirable. But clearly, it is not something that we do. Why not? Let's start on a smaller scale. What factors facilitate or impede children from getting around their neighborhood or city on their own?
Fundamentally, distance, having a built environment that allows a child to kind of get around safely, and having those child-relevant destinations within that. Traffic danger is a major factor in kind of preventing kids from traveling. Parents will sometimes mention stranger danger. There seems to be this kind of weird thing is like, if you're living close enough, stranger danger isn't a problem, but if you live too far, then stranger danger comes out as a reason why they might not have that independence. My name is Owen Waygood. I am an associate professor at Polytechnique Montréal in Montreal, Canada. I did my PhD at Kyoto University in Japan. My PhD was on children's independent travel. Since that time, I have researched children's travel in many different countries. Generally, we find Japanese kids are some of the more independent, so we kind of look into why that might be.
To be clear, we are generalizing. No single experience is universal, but we are discussing cultural trends backed up by research. When I refer to the West or Western culture, I'm thinking of the cultural standards of the United States, Canada, and Western Europe, plus my experience in Brazil. Your specific experience may be quite different. Even within Japan, it isn't the same for everyone. But since kids in Japan tend to be more independent, we should look at what Japan does differently that makes that possible. Sadly, even in Japan, children are not going on these grand adventures we see in Pokemon, so I'm going to leave the issue of distance for a little later. We can start with an easier one: traffic danger.
The planning in Japan often kind of assumes that people aren't necessarily going to be getting around by car. Because there's this assumption that kids can kind of get around by themselves, there's all these kind of things that happen within the planning that would facilitate that.
Urban spaces are designed for pedestrians and cyclists first.
Residential streets in Japan are what we would call the shared street. So there's no sidewalk, everyone just kind of uses the same space. I guess like a way for somebody who's never lived in Japan or seen those things, I would describe it as like a slow bike lane that cars will sometimes go down.
The infrastructure that is created for car users tends to go outside of neighborhoods.
They will have arterial roads. So an arterial road is like a road that is meant to move traffic. Okay, so this is often kind of 2 lanes each direction or more. And in those situations, they will always have a sidewalk because that's dangerous, right? That there's too much traffic going at higher speeds. Japanese highways are all pay-per-use. So you have limited access points, and when you access it, you pay to use it. They're often actually elevated. Even in kind of rural areas. I was saying to my wife when I was trying to I'm trying to find like instances of these interactions between the pedestrians and motorists, but you actually so rarely come across a car when you're using these residential roads because they're not built for cars and they don't allow for high speed, that the people who want to use a car generally go to those arterials. So all of these residential streets, it's primarily pedestrians and cyclists who you'll see.
This minimizes how often drivers need to interact with pedestrians and cyclists. There's no reason someone would need to drive through a neighborhood. Pedestrian-centered design is very clearly reflected in the Pokemon games. I used to think that we don't see car infrastructure in the games simply because it isn't relevant, and to a degree that has to be true. For example, we see lots of freight trucks over Sky Arrow Bridge in Unova, but none in Castelia or Nacrene cities. The moving truck at the start of the Hoenn games doesn't seem to have any roads it can drive on. But look at Route 4 in Unova as it appears in Pokemon Black 2. The main path has pedestrian access, while trucks go by on a separate, elevated road. An even clearer example is in Lumio City, where pedestrians, cyclists, go-go riders, and even taxis all share the same space on roads that have no sidewalks and cafe seating that spills out onto the streets. But it's not just the urban design that makes Japan more pedestrian-friendly. Even when Japanese drivers and pedestrians do need to cross paths, their cultural attitudes prioritize those on foot.
Well, you'll see drivers doing it almost basically saying, sorry, so I have to go through here. Thank you for slightly slowing down or adjusting your trajectory so that I may squeeze through. So in Japan, the cars really do pay attention for the pedestrians and cyclists. Like North American pedestrians were kind of told to always be like, be aware, right? So you're always kind of checking your shoulder before you like do any movement. And in Japan, cyclists and pedestrians just kind of walk. And I think part of it is because that responsibility is different. So it's very much the car's responsibility to be paying attention for those more vulnerable users. Whereas often in North America, we get this whole thing about, oh, the child needs to learn how to be safe so that they can avoid the car danger. It's kind of an odd thing to put it on the child's shoulder, who is not the one creating the danger, and not the adult.
That brings me to how Japan mitigates stranger danger to keep kids safe. The answer is relatively simple. It's community.
So Japan loves festivals, these matsuri. Every neighborhood has these have these festivals, and so generally, kind of all the neighbors kind of get together. You know, maybe the dads have beers, people are just chatting, kids are playing games, and so there is this, I guess, like a bond between the neighbors. Like they're more likely to kind of know each other. Yes, if you know those people, you do feel like, okay, if my kid's out and they're having problems, there's a decent chance there's going to be somebody that they know.
When people are not strangers, there is less stranger danger. If you trust your neighbors, you can be confident that they will help, protect, or guide your children on your behalf when you're not around.
And even if they don't know somebody, I feel like in Japan that they do understand that, like, just going into a shop and asking the person working there, it's like, oh, like, I'm kind of lost, like, where do I go? That's kind of normal, right?
The Pokemon games also reflect this. Almost every character you interact with gives you some kind of tip or helpful item, or even just encouragement.
For children, the benefits of better community connections include improved social skills, social interaction, well-being and safety. Interactions with adults, particularly adults who are not the child's parents, were associated with improved social skills for the child. Well-being and social relationships are associated, and the absence of loneliness makes children healthier.
In Japan, there is a cultural practice called aisatsu. Aisatsu literally means greeting. Japanese people put a lot of stock in greeting each other, even strangers on the street, as a sign of respect.
And this is a contrast to North America. So kids here are actually taught to say hello to people, even if they don't know them, right? So it's almost like the reverse, where it's like, oh, like North America, you're taught like, be scared of strangers. In Japan, you're taught to connect with strangers. This aisatsu, like when you walk in the streets, like they'll say "Ohayo gozaimasu," like good morning to you as you walk along, even if you don't know them.
Aisatsu helps build communities. It might start with a simple konnichiwa, but if you see and greet the same person every day, you develop familiarity. Maybe one day you comment on the weather or stop to have a conversation. These social connections are healthier for the child, and they help parents feel more confident in granting kids independence.
There's kind of two factors to it. So it can help develop those connections. So it's like, oh, after a while, it's like, oh yeah, I always see that same grandma every day. And so after a while, you like smile and you see them. But also it kind of tells you, people know that you're here and they're watching to some extent, right? So you know, if that's not your neighborhood, you're not invisible. There's like those two factor of like, okay, people are watching out for each other, but people are also watching each other. So don't be littering or don't be doing something that you shouldn't be.
In the Pokemon games, greeting NPCs isn't a mechanic. But you know what happens when trainers' eyes meet? You battle. And ultimately, this serves the same purpose. By sparring with other trainers, we learn more about ourselves, our Pokemon partners, and, crucially, our opponents. Even if you only spend a few minutes in a one-on-one battle, you will get a sense of what your opponent is like, how they treat their Pokemon, and whether they are trustworthy. If you get lost in Viridian Forest, are they someone you can go to for help? And even if you didn't battle, the Pokemon themselves can be a point of connection from which a relationship can grow. Think of people walking their dogs. Dogs can provide some protection from wild animals and other people, but they can also create social situations. Maybe someone thinks your dog is cute and comes to say hello. Or maybe your dog thinks they are cute and insists on sniffing their leg. Perhaps you become friends because of that. Most things we discussed work best in smaller areas, like within a neighborhood.
A key difference between, I would say, like metropolises of Japan versus North America is Japan has basically just a whole bunch of villages that get smushed together to make a big city. Okay, so each kind of area function as a village.
Japan doesn't have many areas where you must drive for 10 or 20 minutes to get to a grocery store like you might in a North American suburb. Most everyday destinations are within a reasonable walking distance, even for kids. It is simple for children to get around on foot. Walkable neighborhoods have less traffic danger, and walking also creates more incidental social interactions, more opportunities for relationships to form. It is much easier to allow children to be independent on this kind of scale. Beyond that, some of it starts to break down, but not everything has to if the cultural framework is there to support it. If you travel outside of your city, you won't have your local neighborhood community looking out for you anymore. But by intentionally interacting with people, you can create new connections. Even if you don't know anyone, you can rely on shopkeepers and helpful strangers to give you a hand. In the Pokemon world, Pokemon centers serve this purpose very well, offering a place to rest, restock, and maybe even get some food. And we can have social cultural structures that make sure kids are doing well. For example, the Gym Challenge or the Island Trials provide you with goals to keep moving forward, but they also force you to check in with adults and experienced trainers who ensure that you're doing okay. You can also choose to adventure with a friend. We rarely see this in the Pokemon games, but the anime makes the advantages of traveling companions very clear. Another issue with longer distances is that walking becomes less viable. If we map Pallet Town and Viridian City to Shimoda and Mishima, real-life cities roughly matching their map placement, Route 1 in Kanto would take 13 hours to walk. Walking for 13 hours is possible, but it won't be pleasant. If you ride a bicycle, you can shorten that to just over 4 hours. Still a lot, but much more manageable. Maybe if you ride a Pokemon, you can get there even faster. Unfortunately, there is very little research on children's travel on this scale, but here are a few things we can consider.
Yeah, it's just, I guess it's going to be a matter of time, right? Like they're going to need safe infrastructure and then that time to cover those distances. Once you're going kind of outside of the city, again, like distance, so the distance between cities is going to have to be reasonable.
The anime shows us that there are often smaller settlements between the major towns and cities that we see in the games.
I thought the towns in between were just filler.
Well, that is part of it. Instead of trying to make the trip from Shimoda to Mishima in one go, you can make stops at Higashi-Izu, Ito, and Izu along the way so that each leg becomes more reasonable. Even in the games, when routes are exceptionally long, we often find Pokemon centers or rest houses. They are part of the infrastructure that makes children's travel possible. The other part is the road infrastructure. If the only paths connecting different towns are highways and kids need to share space with fast-moving cars, that won't work. Sidewalks and bicycle lanes help, but ideally you would have dedicated walk and cycle paths separate from car infrastructure. Where I live, there's a pretty decent network of bicycle paths. You can make one continuous trip of over 80 kilometers on trails that only occasionally go anywhere near a car. Some of it is paved, some of it is not, but most is very pleasant, even for long distances. In the real world, public transit is another alternative, but the Pokemon world doesn't give us a lot. The big ones are the train network in Galar and the Magna Train, which is the equivalent of the Tokaido Bullet Train connecting Tokyo to Osaka. Maybe you could count the flying taxis in Galar and Paldea, and there are a few other isolated examples, but there are no really robust systems of mass public transportation that we can look to for insight. Still, any bus or train lines connecting different towns and cities make long-distance travel easier for everyone, including children. All of this tells me that it is possible to build a physical and social cultural environment where Pokemon-like journeys can occur. Certainly on a local scale, but I think on a regional or national scale too. But is that enough? I asked my parents what they would have thought if I had asked to go on an adventure around the state of Rio de Janeiro as an 11-year-old. Rio de Janeiro state is in the right ballpark of physical scale for a classic Pokemon region like Johto or Hoenn. Both of them immediately told me they would say no, and that I wouldn't have asked in the first place. That is true.
It would be insulting if it wasn't so true.
But what I wanted to know specifically was what they would worry about. They brought up the usual: crime, traffic safety, but the first thing both mentioned was maturity. Whether I would be mature enough to handle my finances and ensure I could find food and shelter. I think it's a fair thing to worry about, and another cultural obstacle we need to address. We can have all the infrastructure and social support we need, but it won't be enough if parents aren't on board. Autonomy is essential in child development, but that doesn't mean kids don't need guidance.
Russian psychologist Vygotsky discovered this idea of a zone of proximal development, which is the idea that learning and growth happens when a child is at a stage of trying to do something that's just out of their comfort zone, just out of their current capability. With that comes the idea of scaffolding, the idea that it is an adult, parent, teacher's job to prepare the little bits of independence and autonomy for the child to start learning and getting used to. It's not useful to just throw a kid in the wilderness and say, all right, figure it out, because they'll die. What you want to is scaffold the experience of we'll create this isolated environment where it's okay, you're gonna go from point A to point B, but instead of me walking along with you, you have to figure out how to get there yourself, and I'm probably gonna supervise from a distance.
We see this process at play in the Poketoon Blossom's Dream. Blossom is eager to go on her Pokemon journey, and her parents want to ensure she is prepared.
I'm better at my chores now, and I can manage without you or Dad. So, let me go explore the world!
But her mom resists, because
You get too preoccupied with one thing. That's dangerous, so I worry.
Blossom makes a rash choice and puts herself in danger, but she handles herself okay. She proves and also discovers for herself that she is ready. Her parents probably could have done a better job so that she wouldn't put herself in danger without a Pokemon partner. There's a reason we don't go into the tall grass. But mistakes are part of the learning process. Parents need to be on board. But if they are, I think a Pokemon journey is possible, even in the real world. Minus the Pokemon, unfortunately. The idea of a real-world Pokemon journey can feel distant. But if we as a culture value children as people, we can build spaces where they can be autonomous. We reduce traffic danger by taking cars from where they don't need to be, like neighborhoods and business districts. We empower people to get around without a car by improving public transit and expanding pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. We create a practice of getting to know people and helping even those we don't. And we show everyone, including children, that they are valuable.
A person who learns that they can contribute to society is going to want to contribute to society. Someone who feels like they have nothing to offer, they check out and they stop caring. And they also stop caring about political things. They stop caring about problems that other people are facing because, well, my life is my life. Other people don't matter. I can't make a difference in other people's lives. I'm not going to bother. Versus if you interact with people and see people and develop empathy for people, while also as a kid learn fundamentally that you can have an effect on yourself and others, you are more likely to be active in positive ways.
The process is like a positive feedback cycle. If we value childhood autonomy, we build spaces that make childhood autonomy possible. The further we get, the easier the next steps become. That is not to say that it is easy. Politically, culturally, financially, there can be a lot of resistance. We've been sold cars as a boon for autonomy for over 100 years. They're not. At best, they grant independence to individuals at the cost of communities. More recently, we've been told electric vehicles are the solution. They are not. They are better, but they still require infrastructure that puts cars ahead of people and individuals ahead of communities. But we can reverse this. The Netherlands, for example, was not always a country of cyclists, but now it is. And I see it as an important step toward childhood independence and ultimately toward forming a community that supports itself, that provides free healthcare, where the people who can protect their communities do so, no matter who they are. I don't want to make it seem like I'm a highly engaged anti-car youth liberation activist. I have been anti-car for a long time, and I think youth liberation is fundamental, but I've never publicly advocated for this kind of thing before. I'm not very politically engaged, I tend to avoid strangers, I barely know my neighbors. Honestly, it feels like I'm telling you to go and accomplish things that I haven't gotten off my ass to do. I'm not even a parent, so why am I trying to tell people what is good for their kids? Because I don't know how else we survive. We need to reduce car use, both to make cities safer for children and to reduce the burden on our planet. We need strong, resilient communities to face the challenges of climate change and fascism. We need mutual aid, and we need children to have a say in their future. Right now,
children suffer from a democratic deficit. They are a low political priority, and their viewpoints and rights are often ignored in the policymaking process. Children are a large but uniquely uninfluential sector of the population. They cannot vote, they cannot stand to be MPs or local councillors, they do not hold high offices in political parties or other important institutions. They are very rarely involved in consultative exercises undertaken by decision-making bodies. They do not write opinion-forming columns in interest pressure groups, and so on. In other words, they do not play a part in the political process which determines both nationally and locally the policies that affect their lives. These policies are determined by adults.
I hope this video sparks something in you, like researching it did for me. Yes, a society like what we see in the Pokemon world feels utopian, but it also feels so possible. Maybe one day we can get there. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Dr. Owen Waygood and Gano Hasanbegovic for their meaningful work and vital contributions to this video. If I have given you anything to think about, comment below and we can keep the conversation going. If you want to learn more, my sources and other links are in the description. This video was produced on the territory of the Lekwungen people known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, the original stewards of the land I live on. I've put a lot of work into this video, so I will be very grateful if you can share it with someone, subscribe if you're new here, or just click the like button. If you want to go the extra mile and help make other videos like this possible, go to ko-fi.com/UmbreonLibris and drop me a tip. I'll see you in the next chapter.